All right. So, springtime wild edibles. There are several foods up right now, and there's a pretty short window. So, I'm going to do my best to tell you which ones to go out there like this afternoon and get and preserve. And nature's cool like that. There's windows of opportunity, and I think it just makes me appreciate them that much more when I only have like a week or so to harvest them. And it's also exciting because I know right around the corner there's going to be some new wild edibles to harvest. So May will bring some cool things, and so will June. So I hope to put together another one of these as the season progresses. There we go. Okay, so first of all, why do we care? Why wild foods? Well, over the past 10,000 years since we've been farming, we've unfortunately bred the nutrition out of most of the plants that we eat. We've sort of been breeding for appearance and taste and ease of growing, but no one's really bred food for the nutrients. So when we compare wild foods to the foods that we eat from the grocery store, the wild foods just have so much more in them in terms of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. Also, if you think about foods that are growing in the wild versus cultivation, those wild foods, they don't have the protection that cultivated foods have. So they're more protected, they're less protected, so to speak. So they're stressed out. And basically, stress in a plant makes them better for us. When they're stressed out, they release these phytochemicals that help them protect themselves. And that's awesome for us because those same chemicals that protect them give us benefits. So those are when we're talking about things like antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds in plants, those are the things that the plant is using to actually protect itself against growing outdoors. Also, I think just learning how to find your own food in the wild is it's practical. And nowadays we're trying to reduce grocery store visits. So, last week I ran out of my salad greens, so I just went out in the yard and picked some chickweed. And what I love most about it is that it's fun. I get exercise, I get sunshine. It gives me an excuse to go outside. So let's start with a couple of basics here. The first thing I want you to think about is where are you? Let me go back. There we go. Okay, so you want to know where you are. Just establish, are you on public land or are you on private land? Oh, Judy, do you mind putting yourself on mute, please? Thank you. So, of course, if you get permission to forage on private land, great. Thanks, Josh, for letting me do that in the past. But you'll most likely want to make sure you're on public land. There's a couple of things to know. For example, state parks, you can forage for foods for personal consumption. Hold on one moment. Let me see if I can mute. Okay, we should be good now. Okay, so state lands, state park rather, it's okay to forage for personal consumption. However, national parks do not allow that. So you're definitely going to want to know where you are. Second of all, find out, look around the area. Is the area clean? Because the foods that you're harvesting are coming from that area. So I never forage near roadsides or golf courses. Golf courses use a lot of pesticides, and that runoff is going to come very close into the forest next to where they are. Also, train tracks. Think about if the site is downstream from, say, a new development or an industrial site. You want to stay away from those. Be aware of your surroundings. I'm always looking on the ground in mushroom season, so that's a good thing. I'm not stepping on things like poison ivy or snakes or big holes, but just keep that in mind in case you're looking upwards, maybe for other things like fruits that grow on trees. So next, once you know where you are, you want to establish if you're going to harvest that food. So if you don't know what it is, the best bet to do is just to take a picture of it. That way you're not unknowingly pulling up an endangered plant, for example. So you take that photo and you can use a great group on Facebook called Forage Maryland. And if you post something, you can usually get a response pretty quickly from someone in that group. So if you know what it is and you intend on picking it, here's a couple things to keep in mind. Never harvest more than you can use for personal consumption, because we're not the only ones that are eating this food. This food's also there for animals and insects. In some places, it could be habitats for animals or insects. Also, we want these foods to come back year and year and year again for future generations. So you should read up on the environmental status of a plant and how to sustainably harvest, because it's really going to be different depending on the plant. For example, some plants you may just want to clip the leaves versus pulling up the whole entire plant. For some plants that are scarce, maybe you only want to take 10% of the colony, or something that's everywhere, maybe only 50%. But there are some plants that are invasive, like garlic mustard or Japanese knotweed. Those you can basically take as much of you as you want, and you can even pull up the roots. So a couple safety tips here. Number one, and I'll go back to this time and time again, never ever eat something that hasn't been properly identified. So that's super important. Safety first. I like to use multiple sources to identify. So I use an online forum, and I also have a field guide. Expert help, that could be someone who I have on my text that is a mycologist or a botanist. Luckily, I can just text them and they can tell me what their ideas are. Also, there are groups for mushrooms, for example. The Washington Mycological Association is awesome. They meet now virtually once a week, and they're just full of experts. So also, when you're trying wild food for the first time, you just want to eat a small amount. So if that's like chickweed, for example, just one sprig of chickweed. If it's mushrooms, let's say 1-2 mushrooms, because you might have an adverse reaction. For example, some people have allergies and they would never know because they've never had that food. Or some foods may give you GI upset. So after about 24 hours after trying the food, if you haven't had any problems, then I'd say it's safe enough to move on to eating a regular helping. Also, try not to mix 2 wild foods at one time for the first time. That way, if you do have a reaction, you can tie it back to what it was that you ate. Another thing is knowing which food should be cooked before consuming. So edible flowers, for the most part, we're going to eat those raw, but some foods like stinging nettles, just the name of that, right? Those pictures are actually of stinging nettles. You can see they have hairs on them, and cooking deactivates those hairs. Those hairs will sting you. They inject an acid into your mucous membranes or your skin, and it's very irritating. So cooking is absolutely necessary for stinging nettles. Of course, all mushrooms you want to cook, and then fiddlehead ferns. Those should be cooked before eating. So probably pack some gloves. Nettles are up and looking great right now. And then before you consume anything, wash really well with water. All right, we're going to move into plants next. If anyone has any questions about that stuff that I just went over, go ahead and send it to the chat room. So the first plant that we're going to go over is garlic mustard. And this stuff is literally everywhere. It's super invasive. It was brought here a very long time ago, and it's just completely taken over our woods. So we want to use this, eat a bunch of it, pull it up by the root for sure. The leaves, the flower, the root, it's all edible. So it's actually all pretty delicious too, so that's great. One thing that this does that I couldn't believe when I learned about it is this plant injects a chemical into the soil, and that inhibits the growth of native, like species that are native to here. It inhibits their ability to grow. So that's fungus and plants. So basically this plant kills other plants around it. And this happens for about 20 years, and then it stops producing that chemical. So that's a lot of destruction over time of our native species. So hopefully that motivates you to go out there, pull it up, and eat it up. I actually think that there's a garlic mustard pulling contest in the Patapsco. I forget when it is. I don't think it's happening this year, but you would get an award for pulling the most pounds of garlic mustard in a given day. So it's highly encouraged to forage. So I'm going to mostly talk about the leaves here. These leaves can be eaten raw, and that's a good distinction because there's a lot of vitamin C in this, actually more vitamin C than oranges gram for gram. However, it's probably hard to eat enough garlic mustard to equal an orange, but you could try. The thing is, vitamin C is degraded in cooking. So that's great with this plant. We're going to eat it raw and we're going to save that vitamin C. As the plant gets older, the leaves get a little bit pointier and then it starts to flower. So that bottom left photograph, you can see the flower and you can see the leaves are pointy versus the bottom left photograph. The leaves are kind of round. So the round leaves, that's a young garlic mustard, and that's how I prefer to pick them. There's a little bit of young garlic mustard still in the woods as of yesterday, but a lot of it's flowered. It's both fine. It's just the older garlic mustard, the flowered garlic mustard tastes a little bit more bitter. So I prefer to cook the older garlic mustard and then eat the young garlic mustard raw. So you may not get the vitamin C if you're cooking, but you will get a ton of vitamin A. So this has much more vitamin A or beta carotene than spinach. Let's see. So I'm usually making things like pestos or green herb sauces blended up, kind of like just throw it in a blender with olive oil, some acidity, some salt, and make a puree with it. And then that can top protein or grains, eggs, and then you can freeze whatever it is that you're not going to consume. And vitamin C is very stable when it's frozen. Garlic mustard is in the same family as kale, broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. And I'm sure everyone's heard at some point or another how good those foods are for you. They're good because they have this compound in them called sulforaphane. And there are studies to show that it has potential anti-cancer, cardiovascular, and metabolic benefits. So eat this stuff up, and actually that whole family. Pretty much all, yeah, I actually can say 100% of the mustard family is edible, except some are just spicy, so they might not be tolerated by many people who are sensitive to spice. But this is a way you can identify a mustard family when they're in bloom. You have to wait for them to bloom to really identify them. They have 4 petals, and then they have, you can see the pistils and the stamens in there. There's 1 pistil. The pistil is the thing that stands up really straight, tallest of all. And the stamens, there's 6 total stamens. So 4 petals and 6 stamens. In herbal medicine, we've seen garlic mustard listed as an antiseptic and disinfectant for wounds. It's also been used as a diuretic and to support bronchial ailments. So you guys will get a copy of this presentation, and I put some of the most interesting recipes I could find with garlic mustard in here. So there's one, it's a chimichurri with smoked paprika. And the smoked paprika actually helps balance the bitterness that might be present in the older garlic mustard. So that would be a good recipe if you could only find the older flowered stuff right now. If you do find some of that young mustard, then the second recipe, that's a great recipe. It's just a straight up pesto. And then there's a pesto that includes the whole plant with the root, because the root tastes a bit like horseradish. And so that gives it a little kick. And then, of course, there's just a simple saute at the end. This recipe calls for garlic. You do not need garlic in this recipe. The garlic mustard tastes garlicky enough. And then you could also mix in other greens. So let's say you only harvested a cup of garlic mustard. You could throw in a couple cups of spinach or kale or chard. Okay, watercress. So this is a beautiful plant. When you see it growing in water, as you can see, it's bright green. It's very smooth to touch. It's in the same exact family as garlic mustard, so it shares those same amazing compounds. I would say it tastes less mustardy but this one's a little bit more peppery, more spicy. And in fact, it has more antioxidants than kale. So if you're sick of kale, you should definitely move on to watercress. Now, interestingly, I've bought watercress at the grocery store, and I found it's much spicier than the watercress I harvested last week. So that bottom picture is a picture of the harvest from last week. It's in a little stream system, and you can see there's 2 big bunches of watercress, and I had harvested about half of one of the bunches. I probably could have taken more because this is such an abundant plant, but again, I'm going by the rule of only taking as much as I can consume. It does hold up pretty well as long as you keep the bottoms of the watercress in water in your refrigerator. I've had it for a couple of weeks now and it's still looking really good. Let's see, you'll just need a pair of scissors for these, and you're gonna wanna leave the bottom stems and roots under the water because they're gonna grow back, which is great. And it'll grow back within the same season. Right now is a perfect time to find watercress because it's a little bit cooler out. As the season gets warmer, the watercress definitely gets spicier. So I use them mostly as a salad base, but I'm gonna make a pesto with them this week. I'm gonna do 50% watercress and 50% basil and just follow a traditional pesto recipe. Now, I do wanna show you a couple lookalikes, one that is bad and one that is good. So the bad one is called lesser celandine, and you can see that the top left picture. It grows in areas similar to watercress, though it doesn't grow right in the water like watercress, but it grows in moist environments. It's similar in that it's shiny green leaves near the water, but you can see that it's different because each stem of lesser celandine is just one single leaf, whereas watercress on the right, one stem has multiple leaves. Also, celandine, you're gonna see those bright yellow flowers. So that plant is toxic in large doses. If you have a couple bites, you're okay, but I don't recommend it. It doesn't taste good. In large doses, it's definitely toxic. So another plant that you'll see growing by watercress is chickweed, and that's at the bottom there. That's edible as well. It has a couple distinguishing features. It has a line of hair on it that looks like a mohawk. It's just a single line of hair. It has 5 white flowers, but the 5 white flowers, they have these deep clefts. So it kind of looks like 10 flowers. You can see the bottom middle picture there. There's actually 5 flowers, but those deep clefts make them look like 10. So this is great raw in salads or made into pesto. And historically, it was used and still is used for dry, red, itchy skin, think psoriasis, dermatitis, eczema, those kind of conditions. Here's some cool watercress and chickweed recipes that I found on the internet. Up on the top, that picture there, that's an omelet blended, well, the raw egg was blended with the watercress, so it turned it green. It's kind of fun. There's watercress soup in here. There's a hot one, and there's a chilled one, so think like gazpacho with watercress. And then chickweed, there's a pesto recipe with cashews, so it's really creamy. And then there's also just a sauteed chickweed with butter. So that picture of the chickweed at the bottom, that shows you where the most tender tips are. You want to harvest from the red line to the top and kind of leave the bottom because the bottom gets pretty fibrous. All right, stinging nettles. So this is going to be one of the most nutrient dense plants out there. It is just pumped full of things like calcium and magnesium, iron, folate, B vitamins, vitamins A and E. Now this one though is one that we want to cook. So even though it has a tremendous amount of vitamin C, we're probably not going to be able to gain much vitamin C from this plant, but that's okay. We can make up for it with other plants. So this one, you're going to definitely want to use gloves when you're harvesting it. And you want to take up maybe just the top 4 to 5 leaves that are, and they grow in pairs, as you can see. So like the top 4 to 5 pairs of leaves, those are going to be the most tender. As you get down the plant, the leaves are bigger, they're a little bit woodier, they're just not as delicious. Later in the season, you can see that picture on the bottom left, they start to flower. So when they flower, I probably wouldn't harvest to eat at that point. I maybe would harvest for tea use or medicinal use, but it's just going to be too woody. But what you could do is if you had a patch that you could go back to often, you could trim the plant back and then wait about 1 to 2 weeks, come back, and it'll be sprouting little leaves again. So this is something that I actually transplanted from the wilds to my yard. You can see the pot in the bottom right. I transplanted those 3 years ago, maybe. And every spring I get a bunch of nettles and they're just so dense. And I haven't even put any compost in there. They're great. I mean, they just keep going. So I recommend doing that. That way you have a clean source of nettles and they're right outside the door. So, according to Gaia Herbs, a wonderful herbal manufacturing company, nettle leaf has a long history of use for modulating the body's inflammatory pathways and supporting upper respiratory health. The root of nettle has been used to support prostate function, and there are actually human clinical studies supporting its use. So, here's some cool stinging nettles recipes. Of course, there's just simple sauteed, but there's also some soups, one with potato, one with roasted asparagus. Heck, you can even make nettle chips. Forget about kale. And then the top picture there, those are nettle fritters. That's kind of fun. And then there's a recipe for a nettle mint pesto. Now, most of the recipes for nettle pesto will call for boiling or blanching, but remember what I was saying, it's so nutrient dense, we don't really want to boil because then we're going to throw away all the nutrition in the water that gets thrown down the sink. So I would just steam the nettles to deactivate the little stingers and then go ahead and make your pesto. Okay, so wild onion slash garlic. And I kind of did that on purpose because a lot of us confuse them when we see them in the wild. They look exactly the same. And when you take a little piece of the green off and you smell it, it smells kind of the same. But it's okay. They're both edible. There's some differentiating features here. So the top, you can see on the right of the screen, the top right, you can see what the wild onion bulb looks like and the flowers. And then below on the bottom, that's wild garlic bulb and flowers. So they're definitely different once you get up and close to them. But both of these are going to have much, much, much more phytonutrients than our grocery store versions. So, and they just grow all over my yard. I have so many of them that I don't need to buy onion and garlic for quite a long time. So if you have them too or have access to them, definitely add them to your diet. You're going to get much more of, the antibacterial properties that we always talk about garlic is wonderful for. So you could use just the greens on these, just using them like chives or scallions. Or if you find a huge patch of them or have them in your yard, go ahead and pull up the whole entire bulb and slice and either have it raw or add it to a saute or a soup. Okay, so spring flowers. This is the season where we're going to see most of our edible flowers. This first one here is called Spring Beauty. And this one is definitely spring in a nutshell for me because this is the first thing that I see in the woods as early as like the 1st of March. I think it was even earlier this year. And they are just really abundant in central Maryland. I know other parts of the country, they're not as abundant, but here they're everywhere. So you can absolutely harvest these. Um, I've just seen hillsides completely covered with them. The bottom left on the right side, that's just kind of a small snippet of how they look when they're everywhere. Just it's like a nice blanket of spring beauty. So these flowers are just full of vitamin C and antioxidants. So they're just a great addition. They're a little bit sweet. They're not bitter at all. You just want to make sure you're not mistaking them for Star of Bethlehem. So Star of Bethlehem, you can see has 6 petals and the Spring Beauty has 5. And Spring Beauty can be different colors. The bottom shows you a little bit more of a white color, whereas the top, it starts to get a little bit more pink. So this is a tree, the Eastern redbud. And I think everyone has seen this once or twice recently, right? They're just absolutely beautiful right now. And they're another early flower, early bud. They have a slightly sour taste to them, and that's because they're packed full of vitamin C. So what I do, you can see that little bouquet I made. I'm trying to bring spring in the house. So I'm making little bouquets of wild plants. So I'm clipping just a little section of a branch and then putting that in water. And that's, sits in my house for 1 to 2 weeks. And then I can just take off red buds whenever I want them. Usually for me, it's throwing them in salads or using them as a garnish. But of course, the internet is full of great recipes, particularly for pickled red buds. I did that last year and it was cool. It turns your vinegar pink, which is really fun. There's also recipes for red bud jelly and red bud syrup. I'm also thinking about mixing in some of these fresh red buds into a pesto that I make. So it'll give a pop of really beautiful color in the dark green pesto. And then I'll freeze that pesto. So in the middle of fall or winter, I can take that out. I don't know if it's still going to look like that after it's been frozen, but I'll let you know. I do know that the vitamin C will preserve when I freeze it though. Okay, so violets, these are everywhere. A lot of people have violets in their lawn. They're all over the woods right now. Purple violets are definitely the most common around here. Recently I just found a big patch of yellow, but there are some lookalikes. So this is a good one to have a field guide with you if you want to harvest these. A distinguishing feature is their heart-shaped leaves, as you can see in the top right picture there. If you're gonna pick the flowers and you're out in the woods, I would bring like a little Tupperware container filled with water and make sure you have a rubber band for the lid to keep the lid on. But you can pick them and store them in water right away, and that will keep them from wilting. You can then put that in your refrigerator when you get home, and they'll preserve in that water for. I've had them for 3 or 4 days at this point, and they still look good in the water in the refrigerator. So those cute little heart-shaped leaves, they are pretty delicious. Now you just want to use the leaf, not the stem. There have been reports of some people having allergies to the stem. It's kind of like an irritation in the back of the throat that people have experienced. So just to play it safe, just cut the leaves off and use the leaves. And you want to get them when they're young. So right now is a good time. As the violet grows and the leaf gets bigger, it definitely gets tougher. So of all the wild greens out there that you could eat, this one I think tastes the closest to spinach. So if you're not sure about these wild greens, start with violet greens. Of course, you can do the same thing as the other ones, the other flowers, just adding them to salads or as garnishes. So the bottom left is dinner from a couple of nights ago. That's watercress on the bottom and then just violets laid on top. There's some other wild foods in there, some morel mushrooms and some fiddleheads. There's lots of great recipes for infused vinegars, infused honey. You can even infuse alcohol. You can do violet jellies and jams, and some people do candied violets. That's a great way to preserve their color. When we look at old herbal medicine texts, we see that violet has been used for dry hacking, that should say cough, definitely not couch. If you have a dry hacking couch, there's something wrong. It's also a lymphatic tonic, so your lymph system is responsible for detoxification. So that's helpful. The flowers are very high in antioxidants and vitamin C. So we're seeing a trend here. All these edible foods have very high levels of vitamin C in them, and everybody's talking about vitamin C right now. So I think this is a good solution. Okay, there's a question I'll answer before we move on to dandelion. So, oh, hey, Rachel, how did you get such a lush edible yard? Have you transplanted things or any other tips for encouraging wild edibles right outside our doors? Okay, good question. I definitely transplanted the nettles and I transplanted them to a pot because I didn't want them to take over my yard. They're like mint. They do tend to spread pretty rapidly and they hurt. So that was my way of keeping them contained. I don't use any treatment on my lawn, so no fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. So that, I think, right there just helps with the dandelions, the violets, the wild onions. I've lived at my current house for 3 years, and I haven't used anything in those 3 years. And I know before I bought this house, an abandoned home for 12 years. So I felt pretty good knowing that there had been many, many years without any herbicides or pesticides. So that's probably helpful in the grand scheme of things. Um, let's see, what else? I transplanted some ramps from the wild into my yard. Ramps are wild leeks, and they're pretty delicious, but they're endangered, and they're not profuse in this area. So I had to travel pretty far to find them. Luckily, the place I did find them, there were thousands upon thousands. They were doing really well there. So I took a few and I put them in my yard, and now they're populating in my yard. So I didn't think that was possible. I didn't think I had the right atmosphere, but they took off. Weeds are called weeds for a reason. So just play around with it and see what happens. So speaking of weeds, dandelion, unfortunately, is called a weed by many people. And it's the bane of many people's existence who are into lawn care. However, dandelion is just an amazing medicine. From flower to leaf to root, it's useful, and it's used in almost every culture that uses plants for medicine. So right now we're just talking about flowers. So with these flowers, we know that they're very high in vitamin A, so beta carotene. Again, there's a vitamin C and other antioxidants as well. And interestingly, gram for gram, dandelion flowers have 8 times more antioxidants than spinach. So that's pretty cool. And taste-wise, they're not very bitter. If you've had dandelion leaves, they're very bitter. But the petals, I'm sorry, are nice. They're just slightly sweet, bland if anything, but they add a beautiful color to your salad. You could also simmer the flowers in a little bit of water and make a dandelion tea. You'll kill the vitamin C if you're simmering it, but you will still absorb the beta carotene or vitamin A. And then I added a recipe in here for you for dandelion fritters. I thought that was kind of neat. So there's a lot more plants out there than I could ever go over, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too many things. So to give you a little bit more to learn from, here are some of my favorite resources. The first one is a YouTube channel hosted by a forager from Pennsylvania. It's called Learn Your Land, and he is awesome. Lots of videos on plants and mushrooms, identification, preservation. So definitely start there. And then there's some online resources, like the next one down, but there's also probably some books that you're going to want to bring with you if you're going into the woods. So the 5th one down, Guidebooks by Samuel Thayer. He's written 2 really good books that you could bring with you out in the woods, Nature's Garden or The Forager's Harvest. And then, of course, there's a classic book written in 1962, Stalking the Wild Asparagus by Ewell Gibbons. It's a fun book. It reads really well. It's not too technical, and there's a lot of funny passages in there. And then the last one, if you're into foraging and being self-sustainable and self-sufficient, Landon Cook's great. He runs a blog that's wonderful, and he wrote this book called Fat of the Land. He's out of the Pacific Northwest, so the plants and mushrooms are a little different in his book than we have, but there's definitely some crossover. And what else on here? Oh, for recipes. Foragerchef.com is run by a professional chef, and he has just some really cool ideas on there, very out of the box recipes, incorporating all different kinds of wild foods. Okay, so let's get some questions now. And if everyone just wants to send me their email address too, you could send me an email through the chat box, or sorry, send me your email through the chat box, or you could email me directly. There's my email there. And then I'll be able to send you guys this, so you have all the links, you have the pictures, the information, and also send you a link to the recording. So let me get off this screen share. And Okay, does anyone want to unmute themselves and talk, or shall I do show and tell?
Let me see the email one more time. I'm sorry.
Sure. I'll just let you know. It's KCONNELL at W Ross, ROSS, MD, as in medical doctor, .com.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Can you talk about foraging for morels at all?
Sure. I debated whether or not to talk about morels in this because I feel like I need an hour or 2 or 5 hours to talk to you guys about foraging morels. Well, first of all, let's start with what they look like. Let me grab some.
Woo.
So for mushrooms for storing, this is usually how I store them at home. This is just like a sandwich bag, a brown paper bag. So morel season is right now. It starts, I found the first one this year, mid-March, and it'll go, hopefully with all the rain we've been having, till mid-May. There's a lot of different morel species out there. These are 3. And I couldn't exactly tell you the species name. I'm definitely what you would call an amateur mycologist. This one I call blonde. This one I call little blonde. And this one I call black fairy house. None of that's correct. But one of the things that's characteristic about morels is their shape. They have this conical shape and they have these ridges. They're like little brains. Mm-hmm. And then very important, there's only one lookalike that's toxic. So very important to know that a true morel will be hollow on the inside. So let me get a knife and cut this guy in half. Okay, so here's your test. If you cut the morel in half and it is hollow, you have a true morel. If you cut it in half and it's solid, that's what is called a false morel, and that's definitely toxic. So yeah, those are the big ones. They like to grow under poplar trees. So if you can identify a poplar tree, that's a really good start. Just kind of look down at the ground. I mean, this guy is only a couple, 3 inches. So you really have to spend your time going nice and slow and just looking really hard. It took me years to find patches. And so every year I just go back to patches, but it's really hard to find new patches because they're just ridiculously hard to spot. So don't give up, especially you, Mike and Jessica. I know you haven't found one yet. You will. It's a really good year.
Cool.
Any other questions?
I don't remember if you talked about dandelion greens.
Yeah, dandelion greens are certainly bitter. They're more bitter than most of the wild edibles, but they're truly wonderful. They're full of potassium. They're considered a diuretic, so if you eat enough of them, you'll probably be urinating a little bit more, but that's okay. It's detoxifying. If you get them early spring, so now until early May, they're going to be a little bit sweeter versus if you wait until later May, June, July when it gets hot, then they get really bitter. So now's a good time to use them. Maybe you just start with a couple of sprigs and chop them up and then throw them in a salad so that you're not eating a completely bitter salad. Mm-hmm. You could also saute them for about 5-6 minutes in olive oil, garlic, lemon, and that'll take some of the bitterness out. Mm-hmm. But that bitter is actually very, very good for your liver. That bitter flavor helps stimulate bile flow and digestive enzyme secretion, so it's great for digestion.
Yeah, Carrie, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, good. I was just, I've been listening to you. It was a fabulous presentation. How many of these do you grow in your own yard that you don't pick, let's say like that?
that I,
In other words, like you're foraging, you're going out different places, but do you also grow? It sounds like you grow some of them in your own yard too, right?
oh yeah, sure. So the ones that I have in the yard are the ones that you probably have in your yard too. So violets. Let's do a little show and tell of what I have here. So this is what I got before I got on the call today. So lots of dandelion leaves. And to put these in a salad, actually, let's just.
Look at what she's doing.
Oh, Iris,
Here.
can you mute yourself? That way
Yeah.
the video stays on
Yeah.
this. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go ahead and just put a salad together as we're talking about what's out there. So this is watercress. And I store the watercress actually in an old clamshell. So I save these clamshells, and that way when I have cleaned my watercress, I can just put it in here, and the humidity in here is perfect, and it'll stay for quite a while. Okay, so we've got the watercress. I'll actually help you, Iris.
Yeah, am I supposed to be on mute?
Okay, you're good. I just muted you. All right, so watercress is the base, and then the dandelions, definitely for my yard. The watercress is not, okay? That grows more in streams. I don't have a stream in my yard. So then with the dandelion leaves, after I wash them, I'll just pull them and then start putting them into the salad.
You call those dandelion leaves or like flowers?
Oh, thank you. No,
right.
flower. Yeah, and I could definitely go more than that, but with the leftover, I'm just gonna fill this up with water, and that'll preserve for several days in the refrigerator. Okay, these definitely came out of the yard. I bet you have some in your yard too. These are the purple violets. And they're washed, so they can just go straight into the salad. Okay. These right here are the yellow violets that I saw in the woods the other day. These did not come out of my yard. And I'm doing an experiment. This is tequila. I'm trying to make tequila healthier by infusing some vitamin C in there. We'll see. If I were to use purple violets, this tequila would turn like light purple. I was wondering if it was going to happen with the yellow violets and turn it yellow. It's slightly yellow, but not much. Chickweed. Chickweed definitely comes up in the yard. This is what it looks like. And I had mentioned something about the, let's see, there's like an elastic structure on the inside of chickweed when you pull it apart. I don't know if you can see that. So it's like this elastic band, this thing right here. So that's like a common feature of chickweed. So when you're pulling it apart, there's that little elastic stuff. Now that's the stuff that's mostly towards the bottom of the plant. So that's why you only want to use the top part of the chickweed. Or you could just pull off the chickweed leaves and forego the stem. So that's going to go in the salad too. Okay, what else? Oh, I forgot to put this in the presentation, and I realized I had it when I just went out before the class. So this is wood sorrel, and it looks a lot like clover. This one has yellow flowers, so it's called yellow wood sorrel, and it is super lemony and acidic to taste. So I don't use a lot of this. I just use like garnishes of it, because it's just so sour. It's wonderful though if you want to put it in a pesto to mimic lemon if you don't have any lemon on hand. And the whole plant's edible. It's a little woody down here, so I don't typically use the bottom, but you can use the cute little flowers too. So that's yellow wood sorrel. Another thing that I have in my yard, this is strawberry. So I have not wild strawberry, it's cultivated strawberry, but there's hundreds of flowers out there right now. So I figured I would just throw a couple in my salad tonight. I don't think it tastes like strawberry, but it's still full of antioxidants, so that's good. One other thing I pulled out of the yard that we could throw in the salad is this right here. So here's the top. So I wasn't actually sure just by looking at it if it was wild garlic or wild onion. So what I have to do is get into the bulb to figure out if it has cloves. If it has cloves, then I know it's the wild garlic. If it doesn't, if it's one big bulb, it's going to be wild onion. Okay, so this is wild onion. It's just one solid bulb in there. Sorry, you can't really see that very well, but trust me, it's one solid bulb. Whereas this guy right here, I actually found a clove. So this one, the small one, is wild garlic. So with these guys, I can just pull little pieces of the green off. I'm probably gonna save the bulbs to saute because that's just kind of aggressive in a salad, but little bits of these chives in the salad are great. I think that's it for what I found in my yard. I don't have this in my yard. This is the Eastern redbud, but I did take some from my walk the other day, and then I have it in my vase, so I can just pull them off and add them to the salad. And believe it or not, I don't have any garlic mustard in my yard. That I see that as a good thing, but this is some baby garlic mustard I found on the hike the other day, and I'm just preserving it. I still have it in water. It'll preserve really well in water, but what I'll do, because it's already been a couple of days being preserved in water, I'm gonna wrap it up in a paper towel. So I'm keeping it pretty wet. The paper towel is pretty wet. And then I'm just gonna roll this up and put this in my crisper, and this will stay for 4, 5, 6 more days probably. But since this is the baby garlic mustard, you can tell because it still has more of a round shape to it versus a spiky shape. Because it's baby, I feel good about eating this one. It's not gonna be as bitter. It's just gonna be a little bit garlicky, so that can go on the raw salad too. All right, I think that's everything I was able to find in the yard, and then a couple of things in the woods. So it's coming together. It's looking pretty good. So I'll probably want to add some salt, pepper, some olive oil. And then one cool thing that I don't have prepared, but I could do, is I could take all of these violets that I harvested and stick that into some kind of glass container and fill that with like, let's say, rice vinegar or white wine vinegar, something that's not a colorful vinegar. That way it would infuse that purple out of the violet, and then I could use that in the salad too. Question, okay, where do fiddleheads grow? Are there toxic lookalikes? Great question. Yeah, that was something I was debating on bringing up. I did find out recently that they are on the protected list, so they're not endangered, but they're protected, meaning if caught, you could get a fine collecting those. I don't think anybody really realizes that, or I don't think that is, I don't think that's enforced, because I know a lot of restaurants in Baltimore that have fiddleheads on their menu. So here's the thing, just be smart about it. Be smart about foraging them if you find them. So what that means is, let me show you some pictures actually. Okay, so this is a cluster of fiddlehead. Particularly the one that we're interested in is ostrich fern. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 ferns that are about to unfurl. So rule of thumb, to protect the species and to protect the colony, you'd only ever want to take away 50%. So only take 2 of these and let the other 2 turn into full-on ferns. That way they can create their seeds. So this is, at the end of the season, this is what their seeds will look like, and then that'll spread and you'll have more fiddleheads the next year. So there are toxic lookalikes. I'm not sure if they're actually toxic, meaning they'll cause liver damage or they'll just really hurt your stomach, but either way, you don't want them. So this is one of the ones here that you don't want. The distinguishing feature, this one too, of the ones you don't want is that they're very furry, whereas a true ostrich fern is going to be very smooth, and a defining characteristic is this ridge right down the stem. So if you have a smooth fern or a smooth fiddlehead and a ridge right down the center, chances are you have the right fern. They tend to grow near water supplies. I found most of mine on the sides of rivers in bright sunshine. I haven't found a lot of them, so now it kind of makes sense that I heard that they're protected. But when I do find them, they are profuse, so that's a good thing. All right, I think I've got another question up here. All right, during the foraging safety tips, you recommended not foraging by roads or train tracks, for example. How far away would it be safe enough to forage plants if they are these riskier landmarks? Good question. The answer is I have no idea. Think about yesterday's rain and how crazy that was. I'm thinking rain like that could really pull some material for many, many feet. I don't know how many feet, but I think it's possible. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry. But wild areas are definitely a good plan. So you'll have to walk further into the woods, but that's good, right? Exercise. Another question, if your lawn was treated but was then left for multiple years, say 3, is it then okay to use the dandelions and violets from the yard? If not, what is a good waiting time? Another great question that I don't have the answer to. I think that I've heard that if you buy land and you want to become an organic certified farm, I think you have to wait 5 years. I could be wrong. So maybe that's something you want to Google. That's a good rule of thumb. That's for USDA organic certification though. So maybe it's a little bit less. So I've been here 3 years. I knew it was not treated, but I would say 3 years I would feel okay with. Another question, do you think the side of the asphalt road that is not being used, maybe 1 car per day, is okay to forage? Maybe if it was 150 or 50 or 100 feet away from that, I still wouldn't go right next to the road. Unfortunately, a lot of nettles grow right next to the road, so that's frustrating when you see a nice patch, but it's right there. Okay, I think that's it for questions. We've got 2 minutes left if anyone wants to ask one more question. But if not, happy foraging, everyone.
Carrie?
Yeah.
Yeah, what about, I've been learning a lot in some of my classes about Patapsco State Park. Are we allowed to forage in state parks?
Yeah, generally state parks are okay to forage in for personal consumption, not for selling. So there are professional foragers out there who will forage with the purpose to sell. I don't believe you can do that in Patapsco. It's national parks, like Rocky Mountain National Park, for example. Don't get caught foraging there, you will get a fine.
Carrie, is
Thank you.
Morel nature shot glass?
Yes. Well, it's kind of a leaky shot glass. Let's see, here's one right here. Yeah, you can see oops, let me go back. You can see there's a little hole there. It's hollow. So you could fill this up with something if you wanted. Great question. All right, looks like we're all done. Well, everyone stay safe out there. Enjoy that sunshine. And I'll see you at the next one. Bye.
Thank you.